We're now halfway through this story. It's taken me a pretty long session. I ended up putting in somewhere around 3 hours. 3 hours of going through this story and just making tons and tons of edits. These edits were all line edits, and I'm at the point now where a lot of it was just word choice. Going through and editing everything from just overused words, redundant words, getting rid of weak words, crutch, words, etc. And just making things look better overall. My biggest weakness in my writing by far is my use of repetitive words and kind of crutch words. I have a tendency to just overuse the same terms over and over again. And these aren't like full-on sentences, they're simply just repetitive words. In this case, today, I found that I used the word that. I used that 70-something times in a 5,600-word short story. So 5,600 words, and 76 of those words was the word that. Just used that a ton. I also discovered that I used the word just, like just, and the word even. Use those words as well dozens of times in the story here. And you're probably laughing and probably thinking, well, how could you possibly use it? The way I tell my tales, the voice of the narrator with these characters, it's definitely a very feasible thing. It's honestly not that impossible to have hit that. So that was an eye-opening thing for me to learn, and it's always that way. It is always some sort of eye-opening challenge whenever I get to the point of that last 10% of my story, right? The last 10% of all my drafts here. I'm on the final draft and we're going through, and this last 10% of my time with the story is always spent making these word changes, and it always amazes me. It amazes me how much I can read the story and how well it reads as an overall tale. Like if I just read it aloud, how well it sounds. But when I get into the nitty-gritty and I look at it and I actually see how many times I use a word over and over again, it's quite shocking. And I've often wondered if maybe that was what's kept me back. If that's the kind of thing that sort of kept me from maybe getting some of my other stories published, was the fact that I just overused certain words, or relied upon certain terms. And I couldn't recognize it myself. I couldn't actually notice it myself. It seems somewhat, on one hand, it seems kind of hard to believe because these stories read so well without that. Like, even if I made no adjustment at all to these words, it would still read fine. It would still be an entertaining story, and I don't think anyone would get tired of it. I don't think anyone would notice how many times that has appeared in the story. I might be wrong, might be completely off here, and that might be exactly what's been hindering me. I'm not sure. But it's not something that's ever been pointed out. I've never had a critique partner ever really point out my overuse of phrases or overuse of words outside of just, hey, you've repeated this phrase before, or there's a word that really stands out that I've used in a very short window of time. Like maybe I've used in the same, like in the span of 2 pages, I've used the same kind of eloquent word. That's when they'll notice it. But general words like just, that, even, I had maybe was another one that happened to be used. Look was another one that I've noticed here. Those tend to not always show up, at least on my critique partner's radar, or any kind of feedback I ever get. I think these words are common enough that they get woven into these stories, and we just kind of gloss over them. In the same way that we can use the word say or said after a dialogue tag, instead of like using just an adjective or something like that, we can just use say or said, and it's invisible. When you read it, it's invisible. The story just flows in your head. It's the same thing. But when you go through and you start reading, you start picking out these individual words, you can see a lot of the mistakes with it. You can see a lot of these errors. And fixing them just makes your work sound better. It just makes everything a ton better. And I suppose with that, I think we do owe it to our readers to get our work to the best possible state that we can. Even if these stories read amazing, even if they read awesome, if you're not fixing the individual word choices, especially at the end, I think you are leaving money on the table. You are missing out an opportunity to make your work really stand out here. You might not think, and again, I know it's myself, right? When you read it, you may not even realize that you do this, and if you do, you might not think it's that big of a deal. But it makes a difference. It really does. And it's so subtle. It's such a subtle thing. And you may not even be losing your word count. Your word count might not even change. You could just be replacing the word look that you used maybe 30 times in a short story, and just deleting, some of it. But some of it you could just be changing, right? To stare, in other using kind of substitutive words like that. In the case of me using maybe a lot, I deleted a few of those times because a little bit of uncertainty. There are a few times in the story where the narrative uncertainty didn't work, that using maybe just simply was not working, and so I substituted the word perhaps as an example. There are times to put different substitutions in there, and sometimes you can take things away, but it comes down to the readability at the end of the day. What sounds good? When you read it aloud, what sounds good? And I've kept repetitive words in there. There have been some paragraphs, even the story, where I've used the same word a couple times in the paragraph. The example I'll give is that. There's a couple times where there's a paragraph I can think of right now where I used that, I think, 2 or 3 times. And part of it was for the rhythmic nature of it, the sort of parallelism that comes when you use that. In this case, I was using it at the start of my sentences. So there's a certain parallelism by doing that. But more importantly, it just sounds good read aloud. It just sounds excellent. And I don't think it wears anyone, and I don't think if I even pointed it out, people would ever notice it. If I gave the book to somebody, if I gave the story to somebody to read, I don't think they would ever notice. These are the things that I talk about. These are the kind of the things when I talk about getting to like the perfectionist stage of this, the end game of this. This is maybe the most important part. Once you've done your line editing, once your story reads well, you have to go through and you have to make the individual word choices. You have to see, what am I using for strong words, for strong writing? Am I using weak words, crutch words? Am I using filter words? Am I using just kind of repetitive words as well? Am I using the same terminology in a paragraph, in a page? If I do a quick search, do I find that I use the same word 3 times in a page and a half, right? Perhaps I have to change that. Perhaps I have to get rid of that. It's a lot of these small things that you don't really think about that I don't think you ever learned in school. There's not a teacher I've ever had in my life who ever told me, hey, listen, you used this word a couple of times on the same page here. The repetitive nature makes you write and look weak. Change it. Never had it. Never had an English teacher tell me. I've had an MFA professor tell me that. I've had a couple, actually. I've had a couple professors tell me that I was using the same terminology over and over again. Or the same word over and over again, and they kind of would circle it on my page when I submitted my papers, and they would send it back to me and point it out. And I was like, oh, this is a big deal? Like, I didn't know that. And it amazes me how quickly that hit me, that I had to do something as small as that. And it's an annoying process. This is definitely the most annoying aspect. When you get to just the end of the line edits, when you get to just the individual word choice and checking for the repetitive nature, you're often tired of this process. You're often very exhausted. You've been working on a story for so long that you are ready to be done with it. And it's worse with a novel. It is so much harder with a novel to do this. But that's when you got to buckle down. That's kind of when you got to double down. You really got to make things work. However you can do it, I don't know. But that's when you really have to jump in there and get this thing done. And so I'd encourage you, if you're not already checking for word choice, word selection, and really getting down to editing the individual words of your story, do it. Do it. It is so, 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 so important. Please do that. It could be a difference maker. And that very well could be a difference right there between me not getting my stuff published and maybe me getting my stuff published. Maybe that's it. I'm not sure. I guess I'll find out in the coming weeks and months. Maybe it's true. Maybe this is what gets this story published. Who knows? I've talked before about how this one's for me, but maybe that's maybe some good sentences, maybe some strong individual word choice will save a story that on its face doesn't seem that interesting of a tale. Either way, we're gonna find out.